Self-Models and the Varieties of Phenomenal Experience is a talk I gave a few weeks ago at the AGI 26 conference in San Francisco. It was on the Consciousness Day, and the session was hosted by the California Institute for Machine Consciousness. The California Institute for Machine Consciousness, or CIMC for short. And so when I say CIMC in the presentation, I'm referring to this organization. It's a nonprofit research organization based out of San Francisco here. My suspicion is that their understanding of the self model is overly narrow compared to what a so-called human level self model is. So this talk really is about human level self models and how our experience of ourselves as an agent in the world connects with our basic conscious experience or phenomenal experience of the world. And towards the end of the talk, I raised some philosophical subtleties, a distinction between different kinds of desires, and an account of how human language is involved in our very grasp on and articulation of what we desire. We need to be on alert for ways of presenting an overly narrow or machine-like understanding of human agency, and all of the discussions going on right now about artificial agency and artificial minds. And that's one of the things I'm helping to provide resources for, enriching our picture of human agency and human consciousness. So please check it out and let me know what you think. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. My name is B. Scot Rousse. My friends call me B. I'm a philosopher. I'm thinking about the conceptual and normative foundations for how to think and live in a world of intelligent and potentially and even seemingly conscious machines. When I saw the call for papers for this workshop, I thought to myself, how could I be useful for helping to think about this issue? And so I read a bunch of the CIMC papers. Well, I read the white paper a lot, and I read the machine hypothesis paper from Joscha Bach and Hikari Sorensen. And I decided to try to help think through some of the details of their picture of what a self model is. And here I go. That's what I'm going to do. So the question arises, what is consciousness? Normally, consciousness is talked about these days in terms of phenomenal experience. That is part of the title of our workshop today. There's a lot of different distinctions you can make within phenomenal experience. At the lowest level, there's something we're calling minimal phenomenal experience, which is a mode of experience that isn't not even given to you as a self. There's sensory experience. There's emotional and affective experience. There's motor and practical experience, the experience of being an agent acting in the world. There's cognitive and theoretical experience. And then separate from this, there's imagined, remembered, anticipated, fantasized. Those are all modes of experience, as are dreamings. What's the definition of phenomenal experience? Here is five components of how you could think of phenomenal experience. It's a matter of being awake or there in your experience, such that there is something it is like to have that experience. It precedes and it grounds, and it can be taken up in episodes of reflection, but it does not itself depend on being reflected consciously, explicitly. In the words of the phenomenological tradition, it is non-objectifying or non-positional. It doesn't take itself as an object. It's an openness to the world. And this is why CIMC talks about it as a second-order perception operative in the first order. And Jean-Paul Sartre, I'd like to put the of in parentheses, consciousness of consciousness. And so you could say it's in the CIMC terms, it's a perception parenthetically of perception. Consciousness takes place in a now. It creates a sense of temporality. It happens in a now and a temporal flow that is anticipating what's coming next and retaining what has just happened. And it is asymmetrically presented as my experience. I experience my experience, not your experience. So I started to think of myself, try to figure out what motivates the notion of a self model. I'm not a native speaker of the terminology of self model. I try to ask myself what's motivating the notion of a self model. And I found by preparing for this that it is this notion of a minimal phenomenal experience. Joscha appealed to this when I asked him the question earlier about what's the relation between self model and consciousness. So there is a mode of phenomenal experience available to us in certain dream states, in certain meditative states, in certain dissociative or psychedelic states where you can have an experience, a conscious experience, but it's not experienced as yours. It can be egoless. It can be consciousness in general, consciousness at large. So it's not consciousness that's given to a self. So a self model is coming in the picture here to try to explain what is it that happens to consciousness when it gets focused into a first person perspective. So it looks to me that one level of this, one layer of this, is what some phenomenologists call the minimal self. This is where the consciousness is appearing to you. It's that givenness to you asymmetrically. Your appearances are unified, belonging to you. It is your experience is given. My experience is given as mine. That's a minimal self. There's not much to that self yet. A self model adds more. As far as I can tell, a self model organizes phenomenal experience into a first person perspective. This enables a phenomenally conscious entity to realize itself as an effective agent in its environment. I'm getting this partially from reading the Machine Consciousness Hypothesis paper. I'm quoting from that paper. I think I'm attributing this notion correctly about a self model. That happens in the mythology that they talk about how spirit creates the self and the mind. But as far as I can tell, a self model allows and controls the interaction between an agent controlling its outer and inner environment and the world, so that the mechanism that we are experiences itself as a human being with human desires, concerns, experiences, and contained in the world. Now, when I'm thinking about all of this stuff, I think it's useful to make a distinction that Immanuel Kant makes between two modes of the self relating to itself, two modes of rationality. We can think about a cognitive self-relation, which asks a question about what is true. This comes to us in the Kantian question of the I think. And we can think of a practical relation to the self, which relates to the self in terms of the question, what should I do? That can reaches out to the question, what is good? What is worth doing? Ultimately, who am I? Rather than the I think, the phenomenological tradition talks about this in terms of the I can. So here's my provocation. The CIMC puts forth a theory of the self model that leaves the agent's practical self relation critically underdeveloped. I will offer some conceptual refinements that I hope can help. Let me try to establish my claim that it's critically underdeveloped and say more about what I mean by practical reason. We can distinguish three uses of practical reason. I'm not going to be continually onslaughting you with philosophical distinctions, but I think this one will be helpful. You can talk about instrumental reason, which seeks to achieve the most efficient means to an end. You can talk about moral reason, which isn't talking about doing something efficiently, but asks, what should I do as a human being? What am I obligated to do? Within that space of what is morally permissible, there's a whole other range of questions that traditionally has been called the realm of ethics, the realm of the good, or you can think of as the realm of existential questions. It's not just how do I get the most efficient means to an end, but given an ends that I want, but what do I want to want in the terms of Harry Frankfurt? What kind of person do I want to be? What goals and motivations are worthy of me? Who should I be in this world? Because it's your sense of what you want to want, the kind of motivations you want to act on, the kind of person you want to be. Your particular goals are downstream from that. So here's my claim that for human level self models, fundamental practical questions like this can always arise in our experience. I'm not saying we're always going around posing these fundamental questions, but they can always arise. So the question is not just what are the best ways to achieve my goals given my certain motivations, but what goals should I have? What motivations of mine do I want to identify with? That's Harry Frankfurt's question. Who should I be? Now, when I was sorting out what the CIMC position on this is, I looked at their section of their paper about the concomitant capacities of consciousness. And they distinguish 5 things from consciousness. They distinguish 5 capacities: the intellect, agency, self, sentience, and sapience. If I had more time, I would quote more heavily from this paper to set up my claim that there is an underdeveloped connection to practical questions and a kind of overdeveloped apparatus around theoretical questions. But I'm not going to read these quotes because I have to chug along. I am going to read a couple of quotes from their paper about agency and the self. Agency is the capacity of a system to exert controls over future states. That is, to select among possible actions on the basis of internal representations of goals, preferences, and evaluative criteria. I put this stuff in boldface because this is the stuff I'm interested in. Goals, preferences, and evaluative criteria. Those are the things that really at the core of this practical self-relation when we're engaging in practical deliberation. Now, what about the self? The self or a self model, according to the CIMC paper, is a sustained representation within the mind of what it is to be a particular agent with particular concerns. That's the part I bold-faced, capable of exerting control over portions of the mental process and experiencing itself as doing so. So it is a mode of phenomenal experience, also experiencing these concerns. But what is the nature of the self model's goals, concerns, preferences, and these evaluative criteria? Well, I got to do one more distinction from the CIMC paper because they bring this together with the notion of the psyche. The self and its concerns, experienced as feelings and desires, are conscious contents. But this means for them that the self can be understood as a puppet, its strings pulled by the emotion and motivation provided from behind the scenes. I have to skip this. They call the psyche the combination of all these different elements of the self. So here's the conceptual refinements I would like to offer. I want to say that I think it will be useful to make a distinction between two different kinds of desires. Philosophers make this distinction between so-called brute desires and so-called judgment-sensitive desires. And I'd like to offer a quick refinement on the role of language in the experience of and reflection upon these motivational dynamics. Here I have to show my hand and reveal to you that my imagery is from this movie from made-for-TV 1973 movie by Rainer Werner Fassbinder, Welt am Draht, World on a Wire, about people who made a simulation. In welche Welt leben wir? Ist sie real? Which world are we living in? Is it real? Okay. Now, brute desires are like the desire for pizza or food. They're just given to you, given the kind of organism that you are. That's not the kind of desires I want to talk about. I think there's another kind of desire that we can call judgment-sensitive desires, like the desire to be a drummer in a punk band. You only have the desire to be a drummer in a punk band given it's relative to a given judgment that being in a punk band and having a punk way of life is a worthwhile way of living. It's something that's important for you to do. If you have that stand, you have that judgment that is a good mode of life that is worthwhile. Downstream of that, a lot of other desires follow and a lot of other goals follow. But it's not the same kind of desire like the desire for pizza, which is a brute, for me anyway, brute desire. So this claim, if it hits me that being in a punk band, if I start to decide that the punk way of life is too bogged down in resentment, righteousness, and resignation, I lose the desire for being in a punk band. So that shows you that the motivational efficacy and the experience of the motivation to be a punk has this, is also relative to a linguistic formulation. Language here is not just a means to transmit information and frame representations of independently existing objects. I said this already, the phenomenal givenness and motivational efficacy of judgment-sensitive desires are bound up with how we articulate them in language. And so, let me see if I can just land this. I made two refinements to this. I want to say that in order to build out a richer picture of a self-model, I'm talking about the human level self-model. And to the extent to which we can have a richer picture of the human level self-model and let this guide our creation of artificial self-models, that's maybe what I can help with. I'm offering two refinements to the view that I found articulated in the CIMC white paper and in the machine consciousness hypothesis by Yosha and Hikari. And I argued that judgment-sensitive desires, like a desire to be a drummer, that is relative to a sense of what is good for life, what is worthwhile, is an important distinction that would be useful here. And I've showed with those kinds of desires, they're relative to a linguistic articulation that is not merely a transmission of information. Our linguistic articulations for human beings sometimes shape the efficacy and the experience of our motivations. Our motivations are not separate from our linguistic articulations. This is useful, and it shows that the puppet within limits can rearrange some of the motivational strings by which it is pulled. This is my punchline. If we design artificial systems that lack these dynamics, they will be alien selves. We should not expect them to understand or respond well to us. My next punk show is on October 14th at a punk warehouse called the First Church of the Buzzard in West Oakland. And thank you for having me. I would love to talk to all of you about this stuff more later. I'm talking tomorrow in the main program at 2:10 p.m.
When your gig is?
August 14th. I'm playing in the opening band. We're called Vexel.
Right. Any questions? Yes.
Ah, yes. Nice. Very much. Thank you. The point was made that the and every if anyone builds a everybody dies paper, the kind of agency they attribute to AI is restricted to a very narrow form of instrumental rationality. The AI that they imagine is a monster of unconstrained instrumental rationality. It has no ability to reflect on its goals or to set its own goals. And that does seem to be like an exceedingly narrow picture of what agency consists in. And that would be bad to build that AI. It would not be a really smart AI. It would be very limited. Thank you. Did you say what? Wow. Wonder and awe are my favorite moods. Wonder and awe are moods in which experience is given as a whole. They take us out of a focus in a pragmatic situation and let us get a sense for the mystery of being and the sense that overwhelms and transcends us. So that takes us out of our narrow instrumental goals. And I think there are also moods in which we can be led to reflect more on our own goals located within a larger context. We get out of our own individual narrow self-interest, locate ourselves in a bigger context. Wonder and awe help us do that. And I think they're very important to cultivate for living a meaningful life. Thank you. Thank you.